You know, it's wild how often the word devil or Diablo just pops into our everyday conversations, right?
Absolutely, all the time.
We'll say the devil's in the details, or maybe, jokingly call someone a little devil. And you see characters named Diablo everywhere, these huge video game
Right,
franchises.
the Diablo games, massive.
Yeah, or in Marvel Comics, DC Comics has El Diablo. Even real people like Diablo Cody, the screenwriter, or Don Diablo, the DJ, it's sort of everywhere.
It really is. It's like this cultural shorthand almost.
It feels like a phantom limb of language, something we feel is there. Its presence is kind of undeniable, even when the original meaning might be, well, completely lost on most of us.
That's a really good way to put it, a phantom limb. It is pervasive, isn't it? This idea, it's almost taken on a life of its own, sometimes far removed from its theological roots, but
Yeah.
it definitely keeps shaping our culture.
Absolutely. So what's the story here? Today, we're going to really try and understand this figure. We're going on a journey, really getting into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll trace its path, this winding road, from the earliest mentions way back in ancient texts, all the way to how it shows up, often unexpectedly, in our world right now. The goal is really to connect the dots for you, our listener, to give you a really clear picture of why this powerful idea has stuck around for so long and how it still shapes how we think about good, evil, and even who we see as the other.
And we've got some fascinating material to work with here. Lots of compelling writings, detailed research, historical accounts. We'll be pulling out the most interesting insights, the surprising bits.
Yeah.
Trying to piece together this evolution,
Yeah.
From just an adversary to something, well, much bigger and culturally loaded.
Okay, so if this, horned figure, the classic image, isn't the original Satan, where did that even come from? Let's peel back those layers, go right back to the beginning, when Satan meant something totally different.
Right. That's the crucial starting point. Because in the very earliest Hebrew writings, the word Satan, it just wasn't a proper name. Not like, Michael or Gabriel.
Not a specific guy.
No. It was a common noun, sometimes even a verb. As a verb, Satan meant things like to bear a grudge or to cherish animosity or simply to oppose someone.
Okay.
You see it in the Psalms, for instance. Someone might pray against their Satan, their human adversary, their accuser in court, maybe. Like in Psalm 109, it says, "Let an accuser, Satan, stand at his right hand." It's a role, a function.
So it's like saying the prosecutor or the opponent, not Satan with a capital S.
Exactly. As a noun, it just means opponent or adversary. And that adversary could be human, or it could be a heavenly being, an angel maybe.
But not the enemy of God?
No, not yet. That's the key takeaway from those early texts. This Satan figure isn't Yahweh's big cosmic bad guy. He's, if anything, part of the heavenly court, one of the divine council members.
Part of the team, almost.
In a way, yeah. Operating under God's authority, fulfilling a specific, often adversarial function, not some independent evil force.
Wow. Okay, that's probably a huge surprise for a lot of people. The idea that the devil wasn't always God's archenemy. So when did that start to change? When did this adversary start looking more sinister, more independent?
Yeah, that shift is really fascinating. It happens mostly during what historians call the Second Temple period, so roughly 539 BCE to 70 CE, a really pivotal time for Jewish thought.
Okay.
It's only in the books written during this later period, think Zechariah, Job, 1 Chronicles, that we start seeing this idea of a specific heavenly Satan, someone who's more than just, doing a job.
The earlier stuff just doesn't have him.
Nope, not in the same way.
So why? Why the change then? What was happening that made this figure suddenly pop up and start evolving?
But this is where it gets really interesting. It ties into this huge theological challenge for monotheistic faiths, what scholars call the problem of evil or theodicy.
Right, the big question.
The big question.
Yeah.
If there's only one God and he's all-powerful and he's all good, well, then who's responsible for all the terrible stuff? Disasters, famine, sickness, suffering?
Yeah, how do you square that circle?
It's tough. People back then really struggled with the idea that a totally good God would cause all that pain. It wasn't just an intellectual puzzle. It was like a crisis of faith, especially when bad things happen.
You couldn't just blame God, right? Especially if your whole belief system rests on his goodness.
Exactly. Blaming your all-good, all-powerful God for a plague or an invasion.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable. So you needed another explanation. Something that kept God good, but still accounted for the evil people saw all around them.
So they needed a scapegoat, maybe, or just somewhere else to point the finger.
Pretty much. And different explanations, different theodicies started developing to kind of exonerate God from being the direct cause of bad things.
Okay, like what? How did they do that?
Well, a super clear example is the story about King David taking a census. You find it in 2 places in the Hebrew Bible. In the older account, 2 Samuel 24, it clearly says Yahweh, God himself, gets angry and incites David to take the census. Go number Israel and Judah. And then because of this, God sends a plague as punishment.
So God directly caused the inciting event and the punishment.
Yes. But then you look at 1 Chronicles 21, which is a later retelling of the exact same story.
Okay.
And here, the narrative changes. It says, Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel.
Whoa. So they literally swapped God out and put Satan in as the instigator.
Exactly. It's not a minor tweak. It shows a conscious effort to introduce a separate figure, an adversarial force, to take the blame for the malevolent action, shifting it away from God. It's a narrative fix for that theological problem.
That's fascinating. It's like watching theology evolve right there in the text.
It really is.
Yeah.
And another key text showing this development is the book of Job.
Ah, Job. Everyone knows Job suffered.
Right. And here, the Satan, often still translated with the lowercase s or as the accuser to show it's a title, is a heavenly being. He comes before God with the other angels, and he challenges God about Job. He basically says, Job's only faithful because you bless him so much, take away all his stuff, hurt him, and he'll curse you to your face.
So he's accusing Job of, like, fair weather faith.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Transactional piety. And God says, okay, test him. Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only upon himself do not put forth your hand. Later, he allows Satan to afflict Job's health too, just stopping short of letting him kill Job.
So God gives permission. Satan isn't acting alone.
Crucially, no. He needs permission. Job, despite losing everything, family, wealth, health, stays loyal. And the text implies Satan is acting as this accuser, this tester, maybe even an executioner of the hardship. But still, fundamentally, within God's overall plan and sovereignty, he's not God's rival yet.
He's more like God's prosecuting attorney, maybe, testing the case.
That's a good analogy, yeah. And we see something similar in Zechariah's vision, chapter 3.
Okay.
Here, Satan is standing beside the angel of the Lord, ready to accuse Joshua the high priest. He's acting like a prosecutor again. But the angel of the Lord, speaking for Yahweh, rebukes him. The Lord rebuke you, Satan. Again, he's playing this adversarial role, but he's immediately put in his place. He's still operating within the divine framework, not broken away.
It really feels like a growing discomfort, doesn't it, with the idea of God being the source of both good and bad, like that just became too hard to hold together.
I think that's right. As the understanding of God's goodness deepened, attributing misfortune directly to him became more problematic. But you know, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. You have to look at the bigger picture of Israel's religious history, too.
Right. It wasn't strictly monotheistic from day one, was it?
No, not in the way we think of it now. For a long time, Israel's religion was more monolatric or henotheistic, meaning they worshipped one primary God, Yahweh, but they acknowledged that other gods existed. Think of it like, you know, there are other powers out there, but you pledge your loyalty and worship only to your God.
Okay, so that leaves room for other divine beings to be responsible for. Well, other stuff. Maybe the bad stuff.
Potentially, yes. It allows for a more complex divine landscape. But then you had major religious reforms, kings like Hezekiah and Josiah, pushing hard for exclusive Yahweh worship, trying to purify it.
Right, centralizing worship, getting rid of other influences.
Yeah, exactly. And then came the trauma of the Babylonian exile. During and after that period, this older, maybe more complex pantheon seems to kind of implode, as some scholars put it.
Implode.
Yeah, like it simplifies down. What emerges more strongly is this two-tiered structure. Just Yahweh at the top, and then the angels beneath him.
Okay, so fewer divine players on the field.
Right. And if you have fewer divine beings overall, that problem of evil, where does the bad stuff come from, it might feel even sharper. If it's just God and his angels, and the angels are good, who's left to blame?
Satan. Or the developing idea of Satan.
Precisely. That simplification might have made the need for a dedicated figure of malevolence, someone who could take the heat off God, even more pressing. It kind of sets the stage perfectly for the devil figure to really develop.
So the stage is set. This adversary is primed for a bigger role. And what's really mind-blowing is how in Christian tradition, it's not just about this new figure, but how older figures get sort of retconned into his identity, pulled into the devil's story. How did that retroactive identification work?
Yeah, that retroactive identification is absolutely key to how the devil figure solidified in Christian thought. Take the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
The original bad influence.
Right. But If you actually read Genesis 3, the original story of the fall,
Yeah.
it never mentions Satan. It never says devil. It's just a talking snake, a clever serpent.
Huh. You're right. I never really thought about that.
But later Christian teachings, especially drawing on passages like Revelation 12.9,
It says.
it talks about the great dragon being thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world.
Ah, that ancient serpent. So they explicitly linked the Revelation dragon back to the Genesis snake.
Exactly. They looked back and said, ah, that serpent was Satan. It connects the ultimate villain to the very beginning of human sin and establishes this cosmic battle right from the start. It gives evil a clear origin story within their framework.
Okay, that makes sense. Drawing a line from Genesis straight to this cosmic enemy, what about Lucifer? That's probably the most famous name for the devil, but you're saying that wasn't original either.
Nope, not as the devil's name in the Bible itself. It's another fascinating example of this reinterpretation process. The name Lucifer actually comes much later, mostly from interpretations of two specific Old Testament passages.
Which ones?
Isaiah 14, which is a taunt song against the arrogant king of Babylon.
A human king.
Yes, a human king. And Ezekiel 28, which is a lament over the king of Tyre. Again, a human ruler. Both passages use really vivid, poetic language about these kings' pride and their downfall, describing them as falling from heaven like a star.
Okay, so how does that become the devil?
Well, in Isaiah 14.12, the Hebrew word for the fallen king, described as the morning star or day star, is Hellel. When the Bible was translated into Latin, the Vulgate, that word Hella was translated as Lucifer, which literally just means light bearer or morning star in Latin.
So Lucifer just meant morning star.
Originally, yes. But because the passage was about a prideful figure being cast down from heaven, early Christian thinkers like Jerome and Tertullian started applying this Lucifer passage not just to the Babylonian king, but allegorically to Satan, the ultimate prideful being who rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven. So the name stuck to the devil.
Wow. So a poetic description of a fallen king becomes the name for the fallen angel.
Pretty much. It created this powerful backstory of cosmic rebellion fueled by pride.
And he also gets linked to, like, ancient monsters.
Yeah.
Leviathan and stuff.
Exactly. The book of Revelation especially pulls in that kind of imagery. It describes the devil as this great red dragon with multiple heads and horns. That imagery deliberately echoes much older Near Eastern myths about primordial chaos monsters, figures like Leviathan or Tiamat, these ancient serpents or dragons representing the forces of chaos that the creator God had to defeat to bring order.
So it's layering all these images together, fallen star, ancient serpent, chaos dragon, to create this ultimate figure of evil.
Precisely. It makes him ancient, powerful, connected to the very foundations of the world and the ongoing struggle between order and chaos.
Okay, so now we have this composite figure built from these different strands. How does this fully formed devil actually show up and interact in the New Testament itself? We've got the backstory, but what's his role with Jesus?
Right. In the New Testament, especially the Gospels, the devil becomes a much more direct personal antagonist to Jesus.
Yeah.
The most famous encounter is the temptation in the wilderness.
40 days, right after Jesus' baptism.
Exactly. In Luke and Matthew's accounts, the devil confronts Jesus directly, offering him shortcuts to power and glory. Turn stones into bread, rule all the kingdoms of the world if you just worship me, throw yourself off the temple to prove God will save you.
Classic temptations. Power, provision, proving divinity.
Yes. And Jesus directly rebukes him each time using scripture. It sets the stage immediately. Jesus has authority over this figure, and his ministry is, in part, about confronting this evil.
And then there's that incredibly chilling moment with Judas Iscariot. It's not just temptation there, it feels like possession.
It's definitely portrayed as something more intense. Luke 22.3 says it very starkly. Then Satan entered into Judas called Iscariot.
Entered into him. Wow.
Yeah, leading directly to the betrayal. It shows the devil not just as an external tempter, but as a force that can, in some sense, inhabit or overwhelm a person, driving them to act against God's plan. Though it's important that the text still hold Judas responsible for his actions too.
Right, it doesn't completely remove human agency, but it shows the devil actively working to sabotage Jesus' mission.
Absolutely. And this conflict escalates to a cosmic level in the book of Revelation, the final book.
The big showdown.
The big showdown. Revelation 12 describes this war in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, who is explicitly identified again. That ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan.
And the dragon loses.
Loses big time. He and his angels are cast out of heaven and thrown down to earth, which, according to the text, is why there's so much trouble on earth. The devil is here, furious, waging war against God's people.
And it ends with his final defeat.
Yes. Revelation 20 describes the devil being bound for 1,000 years, then released for a final rebellion, and ultimately definitively defeated and thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and false prophet are tormented forever. It's the ultimate triumph of good over evil, God's final victory.
So the devil becomes absolutely central to the whole Christian story, the cosmic enemy, the explanation for sin and suffering defeated by Christ. But it wasn't just theological, was it? You mentioned earlier it became a way to define us versus them.
That's a hugely important aspect. This figure of the devil wasn't just an abstract concept. For early Christians, it was an incredibly powerful tool, an explanatory framework.
How so?
Well, first, it helped them make sense of their own suffering and the opposition they faced without having to blame God. But just as importantly, it helped them define who they were as a community by defining who they weren't. It was used to characterize, and often, to demonize their opponents.
Creating that clear line, us on God's side, them aligned with the enemy.
Exactly. It created a stark us versus them dynamic, which was probably crucial for a small, often persecuted group trying to forge its own identity in a hostile world.
Okay, let's get into that othering. Who were the main groups that early Christians started associating with the devil, and how did that play out?
Well, the first and maybe the most fraught relationship, given the shared roots, was with Jewish leaders who didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. The Gospels, particularly Mark, Matthew, and John, often link Satan or demonic influence directly to Jesus' Jewish opponents. Think Judas, obviously, but also figures like the chief priests and scribes.
How specifically?
Mark's Gospel, for instance, kind of minimizes Pilate's role in condemning Jesus, making him seem reluctant, and puts more blame on the insistence of the Jewish leaders.
Shifting the blame politically.
It definitely has that effect. Matthew's Gospel quotes Jesus calling his opponents sons of the evil one, or a brood of vipers, which strongly implies demonic parentage or influence.
Oof, that's strong language.
Very strong. And John's Gospel is maybe the most explicit. In John 8:44, Jesus tells the Jewish leaders who disbelieve him, "You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires." It draws an incredibly sharp and frankly devastating line.
So it becomes a tool in that painful separation between early Christianity and Judaism.
It certainly functioned that way, creating deep divisions and justifications for hostility that had tragic consequences later on.
And it wasn't just Jewish opponents, right? What about the Romans, the pagans?
No, it extended outwards too. As Christianity spread, converts came from pagan backgrounds. Figures like Justin Martyr, writing in the mid-2nd century, started teaching that all the pagan gods, Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, the whole pantheon, weren't real gods at all.
What were they then?
They were foul daimons, which eventually gets translated as demons. They were seen as evil spirits, allies of Satan, actively working to deceive humanity and keep them away from the true God.
Wow. Imagine being a convert. Everything you used to worship is now seen as demonic. That's a total worldview flip.
A complete reorientation. And this belief shaped how they saw Roman persecution. When Christians were arrested, tortured, executed, they didn't just see it as Roman politics.
They saw the devil behind it.
They saw demons behind it, instigated by Satan. They believed they weren't just fighting human authorities, but, as Paul wrote in Ephesians, spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. This gave them a framework to understand their suffering and find meaning in it.
It framed their struggle as part of that larger cosmic war.
Exactly. Some writers even interpreted the brief cooperation between Pilate and Herod during Jesus' trial as this kind of unholy alliance, suggesting demonic forces brought even Roman enemies together against Christ. Thinkers like Origen went so far as to say that any laws or rulers hostile to Christians were demon-inspired, even suggesting, quite radically, a moral right to assassinate tyrants if the government was deemed fundamentally evil.
That's taking it pretty far, tying political resistance directly to fighting demons.
It shows how deeply this framework permeated their thinking about the world.
So the devil helps explain opposition from Jewish leaders from the Roman Empire, but then, disturbingly, it turned inwards, too, against other Christians.
Yes, and this is where it gets really messy. As Christianity grew, naturally, disagreements arose about doctrine, about interpretation, about practice.
Happens in any growing movement.
Right. But instead of just seeing these as honest disagreements, the emerging Orthodox leadership often labeled dissenting Christians as heretics. And heretics weren't just seen as mistaken.
They were seen as
secret agents of Satan. People deliberately working from within the church to corrupt the true faith, sow discord, and lead people astray.
Wow. So disagreeing with the majority view could get you labeled an agent of the devil.
Pretty much. Irenaeus, a really influential bishop around 180 CE, wrote a whole book called Against Heresies. He wasn't subtle. He accused these groups of teaching doctrines inspired by Satan himself, saying their teachings were like the poison of the serpent.
That serpent imagery again, poisoning the faith.
Exactly. It frames doctrinal disagreement as dangerous, deadly, and it wasn't just one-sided. Some of the groups labeled heretical, like certain Gnostic Christians, actually flipped the script entirely.
How so?
Well, take the author of a text called The Testimony of Truth. They read the Genesis story completely differently. They argue the God of the Old Testament was actually ignorant or even malevolent, trying to keep humanity in the dark.
Seriously?
Yeah, and the serpent was the good guy, maybe even Christ in disguise, bringing enlightenment, true knowledge, or gnosis.
That's a total reversal.
It is. And the implication was staggering. It meant the mainstream church, the one calling them heretics, was actually the one deceived by these evil lower powers, perhaps even serving the devil unknowingly.
Mind blown. So the devil figure could be used by anyone against their opponents, even turning it back on the established church itself.
Absolutely. It shows just how flexible and powerful this tool of demonization was. Another writer, Tertullian, argued that the very act of choosing beliefs, which is what the word heresy originally meant, was inherently evil because it broke the unity of the church. He thought doubt and questioning were dangerous paths laid by the devil.
So questioning itself becomes demonic. Wow.
It highlights how the devil figure became crucial not just for explaining external opposition, but for enforcing internal conformity, doctrinal purity, and the authority of the emerging church leadership. Anything that threatened that was easily attributed to Satan's meddling.
So we've gone from adversary to cosmic enemy to this all-purpose explanation for any opposition, internal or external. It's just incredible how this figure evolved and became so foundational.
And the evolution didn't stop there. As we move into the early Middle Ages, the devil becomes even more concrete, more tangible in the popular imagination.
Less abstract theology, more like a real creature you might bump into?
Kind of, yeah. We move beyond some of the more subtle theological ideas, like St. Augustine seeing evil mainly as an absence of good, a privation. People in the medieval period seem to need, or maybe just developed, a more vivid, literal image of evil to grapple with.
Something they could picture, something to fear directly.
Exactly. Medieval demonology, the study of demons, often got quite detailed. They'd sometimes distinguish between, say, Lucifer, the head honcho, maybe stuck in hell after the fall, and Satan, who was seen as more mobile, the one out roaming the earth doing Lucifer's dirty work.
The field agent of hell.
Yeah, something like that. And this mobile Satan was the one people really worried about day to day. Imagine living then. Every unexplained illness, every crop failure, every weird noise at night, every sinful thought.
Could be Satan or one of his demons whispering in your ear.
Right. It wasn't just theology. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, fueling superstitions. And Christian ideas started merging with older European pagan folklore.
So you get the devil showing up in folktales.
All the time. Vivid stories of the devil appearing, often in animal shapes, a black cat, a goat, sometimes a handsome stranger, shape-shifting to tempt or trick people. He becomes this grotesque, but also strangely familiar figure in art and stories. Scary, but also sometimes almost comical in his monstrousness.
Making evil both terrifying and maybe a bit more manageable because you could picture it.
Perhaps. And then, boom, the Reformation hits in the 16th century. Massive religious upheaval. And the devil gets caught right in the middle of it.
How did that change things? Did they start doubting him?
Well, it actually split things in interesting ways. On one side, you had reformers like Martin Luther, who seemed to see the devil as more powerful and active than ever.
Blah, more powerful.
Yeah. For Luther, the devil was a constant personal enemy. He famously, supposedly threw an inkwell at the devil while translating the Bible. He saw the devil's hand everywhere, denouncing his opponents, Catholics, Jews, peasants who revolted, even other Protestants who disagreed with him, as literal agents of Satan.
So still using the devil to demonize the other, but now Christians are using it intensely against other Christians.
Ferociously. It became a key weapon in the intense religious conflicts of the era. But, on the other hand, you did have some thinkers starting to push back against the literalism.
Ah, the allegorical idea again.
Yes. Some figures, like the Anabaptist David Joris around 1540, or later Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century, suggested, hang on, maybe the devil isn't a real guy.
What was he then, to them?
Maybe just a symbol for our own inner tendency towards sin, our evil inclination. Or maybe Satan just means adversary in general, an office or quality, as Hobbes put it, not a specific being. They were trying to demythologize him, put the focus back on human choices and responsibility.
But that wasn't the mainstream view, was it? Sounds like most people still believed in a literal devil.
Oh, definitely. These allegorical interpretations were very much a minority opinion. Daniel Defoe, the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe, he wrote a whole book in 1726 called The Political History of the Devil.
Seriously, Defoe wrote about the devil.
Yep, and he strongly argued against seeing the devil as just an allegory. He called that idea a form of practical atheism.
Wow, strong words.
Yeah, his point was if you stop believing in a real devil, you're on a slippery slope to stop believing in a real God. For Defoe, and for many others, the literal devil was still very much a theological necessity. The concrete, personal devil held sway.
Okay, fast forward. Modern era. Science, reason, the Enlightenment. Surely now the devil starts to fade away, become like a historical curiosity.
You'd absolutely think so, wouldn't you? And for many, he did. With the rise of positivism, scientific thinking, secularism in the 19th and 20th centuries, the devil became, well, less relevant for a lot of academics and intellectuals.
Makes sense.
You had influential theologians like Rudolf Bultmann in the mid-20th century, arguing pretty forcefully that modern Christians needed to demythologize the Bible. Meaning, jettison the stuff that seems scientifically unbelievable, like miracles, a literal heaven and hell, and yes, a literal devil. Bultmann thought you couldn't honestly believe in electric lights and radios and also believe in the New Testament world of spirits and demons. For faith to be authentic for modern people, the literal devil had to go.
Okay. So did he go? Did belief just vanish?
Oh, no. Not even close, actually. Despite all those intellectual trends, despite growing secularization in many places, belief in a literal devil has shown remarkable staying power.
Still widespread.
Surprisingly so. There was a Gallup poll back in 2003, relatively recently, that found a majority of most Americans said they believe the devil exists.
Most. Even with different backgrounds.
Yeah, that was the striking thing. It cut across political lines, religious affiliations, education levels, even different parts of the country. The belief was just there, persistent.
Wow, that's a real disconnect between, say, academic theology and popular belief. So the devil didn't just become an allegory for everyone.
Not by a long shot, which suggests this figure taps into something pretty deep, maybe a fundamental way humans try to understand or personify evil.
Were there any thinkers who tried to find like a middle ground, not quite literal, but not purely symbolic either?
Yes, definitely. One of the most interesting takes came from Karl Barth, a hugely important 20th century theologian.
What was his idea?
Barth tried to steer clear of both extremes. He said the devil isn't a person like us, but he's also not just a psychological projection or a metaphor. He described the devil, or rather the demonic realm, as das Nichtige, the nothingness.
Nothingness, like non-existence.
Not quite absence, it's more like a negative reality, a realm where God actively withdraws his sustaining creative power. It's the embodiment of chaos, decay, the senseless opposition to God's good creation.
So it exists, but only as a negation, a shadow dependent on God's light, almost.
That's a good way to think about it. For Barth, this nothingness has a real power, a destructive force, but its existence is entirely parasitic. It has no independent power against God. It exists only because God allows it, perhaps as the necessary backdrop against which his grace and creation shine brighter. It's a really complex, sophisticated way to think about evil.
That is deep. And it really brings us right up to today, doesn't it? Where is the devil now? How does this figure, with this incredibly long, complex history, actually show up in our world? Because he clearly hasn't faded away.
No, he certainly hasn't, and that's the crucial question. Today, within mainstream Christian denominations, belief in the devil is still very much alive, though maybe expressed in different ways.
So the Catholic Church, for example, still a literal belief.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Officially, the Catholic Church teaches that the devil is a real personal being, a fallen angel who made a free, irrevocable choice against God, and the fight against him is seen as a real, ongoing spiritual battle.
And the Pope talks about this.
Pope Francis, yes, quite often and quite directly. He's repeatedly said things like, the devil is not a myth, but a real person.
Oh.
He warns people not to engage in dialogue with the devil, calling him the prince of this world, emphasizing his deception.
And this isn't just talk, right? They still practice exorcism.
They do. The practice of exorcism, the ritual to expel demonic spirits, is still part of the Church's ministry. It inherently affirms that, yes, they believe the devil is real and demonic possession is possible. Gabriele Amorth, who was the Vatican's chief exorcist for a long time, he put it very bluntly. He said something like, whoever denies Satan also denies sin and no longer understands the actions of Christ.
Wow. linking disbelief in Satan directly to misunderstanding Jesus' entire mission.
Exactly. For that perspective, Christ's work is fundamentally about defeating Satan and the power of sin he represents. The two are completely intertwined.
Okay. What about other major traditions? Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
They also firmly believe in a real, personal devil. But they have a particular theological point. They generally don't believe the devil can ever be redeemed.
Why not?
Their view is that angels, as pure spirits, made their choice for or against God definitively and eternally at the time of the rebellion. Unlike humans who have time and physical bodies and can change and repent during life, they believe angelic wills became fixed. So the devil's fall is permanent, no chance of repentance.
Okay. And evangelical Protestants, that's a huge group, often associated with a very active sense of spiritual warfare.
That's generally true. Evangelicals typically hold a strong literal belief in Satan as a personal evil entity. He's seen as actively opposing God's kingdom, tempting believers trying to thwart God's plans.
And often linked to the end times.
Very much so. You often hear teachings connecting Satan's activities to biblical prophecies about the end times working behind the scenes with figures like the Antichrist and the false prophet to deceive the world before Jesus returns.
But still under God's control, ultimately.
Yes, that's always the caveat in mainstream evangelical theology. Satan is powerful, yes, a real adversary, but he's never outside of God's ultimate sovereign control. Even his rebellion somehow serves God's larger purposes in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, so these are the views of large denominations, but it feels like for some groups, the devil isn't just a doctrine, he's like a daily reality, an immediate presence they're fighting against. I'm thinking maybe of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's a really good example of belief translating into very concrete, everyday experience. Jehovah's Witnesses see Satan as a powerful personal enemy, the ruler of this world, actively trying to mislead people and destroy their relationship with God.
So it's a constant battle.
Very much so. Their literature often speaks about needing spiritual armor, prayer, scripture study, hitting to moral standards specifically to resist Satan's snares and lies, which they see as real and pervasive threats in daily life, in school, at work, in the media.
Can you give some examples? How does that look for, say, young people navigating life?
Yeah, the material we looked at had some vivid personal accounts. There was Abigail, 18, talking about the pressure to lie to parents, teachers. For her, choosing honesty, even when it's hard, is consciously rejecting the lie, which she sees as one of Satan's main tools. It's a direct act of spiritual resistance.
So everyday ethical choices become battlegrounds.
Exactly. Then there was Daniel, 21. He talked about being ridiculed by classmates and even teachers for sticking to the witness's standards of conduct, maybe avoiding certain parties or activities. He felt doubt, even depression sometimes, because of the social pressure.
That sounds tough.
Yeah. But he looked at peers who didn't follow those standards and saw them getting into trouble, drugs, dropping out, legal issues. So he views God's standards as protection, and he explicitly identifies the temptations, the peer pressure, even his own internal doubts as fiery missiles or projectiles from Satan trying to knock him off course.
Wow, projectiles from Satan. That's intense framing for peer pressure.
It really shows how personalized the conflict feels. Resisting temptation isn't just about being good. It's about actively fighting back against a specific malevolent enemy in that very moment.
And you mentioned others focusing on their preaching work.
Right. Bo, 20, Julius is 16, Mackenzie, 23. They talked about preparing well for their ministry, studying, being ready to explain their beliefs. They see this preparation as putting on symbolic footwear, making them ready to defend their faith against what they perceive as Satan's misinformation.
So preaching becomes a form of defense, a way to push back.
Exactly. Being active and prepared in their ministry gives them confidence and a sense of purpose, seeing it as directly countering Satan's influence in the world. It makes their daily spiritual practices feel like being on the front lines.
That's a powerful way to live out one's faith, framing everyday life within that cosmic struggle. Any other groups with really distinct views on a literal devil?
Well, Latter-day Saints, often called Mormons, have a specific teaching. They believe Lucifer was the premortal name of the devil, a spirit son of God, very intelligent and influential.
Premortal, before this life.
Yes, in their theology, he rebelled against God's plan for humanity in a great council in heaven before the world was created. He wanted to force everyone to be righteous, removing free will. Because of this rebellion, he and his followers, supposedly a third of the spirits there, were cast out and denied physical bodies.
And he became
Satan, or perdition, the
Yeah.
term signifying utter spiritual ruin. He's seen as the father of lies, constantly trying to thwart God's plan on earth. They also directly interpret Isaiah 14, the Lucifer passage, as referring to his premortal fall.
So a very literal backstory there, too. On the flip side, are there denominations that explicitly don't believe in a literal devil?
Yes, groups like Unitarian Universalists and Christadelphians generally reject the idea of a literal personal devil.
So how do they understand evil or temptation?
They tend to view Satan or the devil as an allegory, a symbol, maybe representing the potential for evil within human nature, societal injustice, or simply the personification of opposition or temptation. The focus is much more on human responsibility, ethical choices, and overcoming internal struggles, rather than battling an external supernatural entity.
Okay, so we have this huge spectrum from a very literal daily battle with a personal Satan to seeing him purely as a symbol for human failings. It really shows how adaptable this figure is.
It's incredibly adaptable.
Now let's shift gears a bit. Talk about where Diablo, the Spanish word, specifically just shows up in culture, often totally detached from theology.
Yeah, it's everywhere once you start looking. Obviously, there's the massive Diablo video game series, which has cemented that name in pop culture.
Right, billions in revenue there.
But beyond games, you find it in fictional characters constantly. Think of Diablo, Maleficent's raven in Disney's Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. The creepy bird.
Gives that instant touch of gothic menace. Then you got Diablo, the alchemist villain in Marvel's Fantastic Four. And DC Comics has used the name El Diablo for several different characters over the years, often these tormented figures with fire powers, wrestling with their own demons, literally and figuratively.
So the name itself carries this weight, this energy of danger or power.
Exactly. And it's not just characters. Look at music. Countless albums, songs with Devil or Diablo in the title. Stage names, too, like the DJ Don Diablo, or rock bands like the Devil Wears Prada.
Why do you think artists are so drawn to it?
It's immediate shorthand, isn't it?
Yeah.
It evokes rebellion, darkness, intensity, maybe something forbidden or alluring. It has instant recognition and emotional punch, regardless of whether the artist or the audience actually believes in a literal devil. It's just cool in a dark way.
It really shows how the figure breaks free from religion and becomes its own archetype in culture. Which brings us maybe inevitably to politics, where demonization isn't just a metaphor.
Right. This is where it gets really potent and often quite troubling. The figure of the devil, or the language of demonization, is still an incredibly powerful political tool.
How so?
It provides a simple, morally absolute way to frame your adversaries. You're not just disagreeing with them, they are evil. A prime example historically was during the Cold War. In the 1980s, you had President Ronald Reagan famously labeling the Soviet Union the evil empire. That language wasn't accidental. It tapped right into that deep-seated narrative of a cosmic struggle against a malevolent force.
Framing the Cold War as good versus evil incarnate.
Exactly. And at the very same time, with this chilling symmetry, Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran was calling the United States the Great Satan.
Wow. Both sides using the ultimate evil figure to describe the other.
It's a stark illustration, isn't it? It perfectly shows, as one writer put it, that, hell, the kingdom of the devil doesn't appear to be situated in the same place for everybody. And it highlights just how politically useful the devil figure can be.
Useful how?
It simplifies complex conflicts. It turns political opponents into embodiments of pure evil, stripping them of nuance, maybe even humanity. It mobilizes your own side by framing the conflict in the starkest moral terms possible. Good versus evil, us versus them.
And that simplification, that demonization, while maybe effective rhetoric, has a really dark side, as the material pointed out.
A very dark side. Because while monotheistic religions themselves aren't inherently violent, the analysis suggests they do become dangerous when believers start taking the idea of a devil and demons literally, and then start labeling other people as children of the devil or agents of Satan.
Because once you label someone that way,
it dehumanizes them. It makes it much easier to justify hostility, persecution, even violence against them. If someone isn't just wrong, but is fundamentally evil, an agent of cosmic darkness, then almost anything can be justified in fighting them.
We've seen that throughout history, haven't we?
Tragically, yes. Think of the European witch hunts in the early modern period. Thousands, mostly women, accused of consorting with the devil, tortured, executed. The Spanish Inquisition justified its persecution of Jews, Muslims, and Christian heretics by painting them as servants of Satan. When you truly believe your enemy's demonic, the gloves come off. They become an existential threat that needs to be eliminated, not just disagreed with.
It's a powerful and sometimes, yeah, terrifying legacy for this figure. So we've traced this incredible journey from a basic Hebrew word for opponent
Just an adversary.
to this central, complex figure in theology evolving over centuries.
Taking on layers of meaning, absorbing other myths.
And then spreading out into folklore, pop culture, and even shaping political conflicts right up to today.
It's an amazing evolution, isn't it? From a functionary in the heavenly court to God's cosmic enemy, to a symbol used to grapple with suffering, define group identity, enforce conformity, and justify fighting the other. It's never been a static figure. It keeps adapting, reflecting human anxieties and needs for explanation.
And that really speaks to the enduring power of the devil, doesn't it? Whether you see him as a literal being fighting God, or a psychological force within us, or a symbol of systemic evil, or just a useful character in stories.
Yeah.
It's clear this is way more than just some dusty old myth. It's a potent idea. It taps into how we understand good and evil, how we define ourselves, and maybe most crucially, how we see people who are different from us.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question for today, doesn't it? For you, our listener, to think about. When we use the language of the devil now, or when we demonize opponents, are we just echoing these ancient beliefs, maybe unconsciously carrying forward these old narratives?
Or are we still actively creating our own modern devils, using this ancient framework to make sense of things we don't understand, or to categorize people who challenge us, simplifying complex realities into good versus evil?
It's worth asking, how much are our own stories, personal and collective, still structured around this age-old conflict? And how does that continue to shape our perceptions, maybe in ways we don't even fully recognize?